Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring you today's most pressing issues from across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. As the Russia-Ukraine war stretches into its fourth year, the conflict shows no signs of abating, with both sides scrambling to secure crucial territory ahead of significant policy shifts, such as the return of U.S. President Donald Trump. Now, in Russia's late attack on Wednesday, at least 13 people were killed and 32 others injured in an artillery barrage in the southern Ukrainian city of Zaporizhzhia. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has once again called for national pressure on Russia in response to its ongoing terror. For a closer look into the evolving war in Ukraine, we invite Dr. Jihoon Yu, Associate Research Fellow and Director of International Cooperation at the Korea Institute for Defense Analyses. Welcome.
Thank you for having me here.
And Malcolm Davis, Senior Analyst at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
So let's start with Dr. Davis first. So this year marks the fourth year of the Russia-Ukraine war, and both sides seem to be focusing on securing key front lines ahead of Donald Trump's inauguration. What's the current state of the battlefield?
Well, essentially, at the simplest level, the Russians are making very slow but very steady progress in the central Donbass area near Pokrovsk. They are trying to take that critical town because it's central to Ukrainian logistics. If they can take Pokrovsk, then they can cut off the logistics to Ukrainian forces around the region and then make quicker gains further into Ukrainian territory towards Kyiv. In the north around Kharkiv, the Russians continue to press, but they're not making much advantage or gains there. In the meantime, the Ukrainians are trying to push an offensive in the Kursk region of Russia. Once again, any advances are very slow. So the way to sum this up probably is a slow but steady slog on the part of the Russians that's costing them a great deal in the number of troops that they're losing. But the Ukrainians have their backs against the wall in many respects in terms of their ability to sustain their defense in these key areas.
Right, and there have also been reports of a mass desertion from the 155th Merchandise Brigade, which is considered one of the most elite armored units in Ukraine. The Ukrainian Army commander has confirmed some of these claims. Dr. Yu, what is the role of this brigade, and what is the background to this mass desertion, and what implications does it have?
Well, the 155th Mechanized Brigade is one of Ukraine's most elite armored units and plays a crucial role in country's defense strategies. It was the first Ukrainian brigade to receive advanced training abroad, particularly in France, as part of efforts to modernize the military. Armed with the state-of-the-art equipment like the AMX-10 light tanks and Caesar howitzers, the brigade has been at the forefront of the operations. Its duties have included high-stakes offensive and defensive missions in some of the most contested regions, underscoring its strategic importance. The recent desertion appears to be the result of systemic problems and intense operational pressures. Reports point to heavy casualties, severe exhaustion, and logistical challenges such as shortages of ammunition and medical care as major contributing factors. Additionally, many soldiers in the brigade were reportedly conscripted against their will, which fueled resentment and damaged the morale. Some soldiers even deserted during their training in France, indicating that these issues were present well before deployment. Leadership decisions have also been criticized for, particularly for assigning the brigade to near impossible combat scenarios, which further deepened the dissatisfaction among the troops. This incident raised serious concerns about morale and cohesion within the Ukrainian military. While the immediate impact might be limited to this unit, it exposes broader vulnerabilities in recruitment, leadership, and research management. If these issues are not addressed properly and spread to other units, they could weaken Ukraine's overall operational effectiveness. To maintain the military's resilience and capability, it is vital to resolve these grievances, improve logistical support, and provide stronger leadership.
Now, let's also touch upon North Korea's involvement in the war. There are indications that North Korean-made self-propelled artillery, such as the M1989, has been deployed to the Ukrainian battlefield. Dr. Davis, does this suggest that Russia's dependence on North Korea is deepening? And additionally, do you view concerns about this serving as a real-world performance test for North Korean weapons?
Absolutely. And I think from the Russians' perspective, what they need is manpower. From Putin's viewpoint, he can extend this war. He's under no pressure, I think, to negotiate an end to it because he sees the ability to outlast the West, and particularly with North Korean assistance in terms of manpower and also military hardware. He can see the tide turning in his favor in 2025 going into 2026. So I think that when you look at that deployment of that self-propelled artillery, it's a classic way to test North Korean military hardware. I think that Russia will continue to rely both on North Korean troops and also the military hardware that the North Koreans produce. And you could see significant increases in the number of North Korean troops beyond what has already been deployed, which is about 11,000 troops so far. And you could see the introduction of new types of military capabilities beyond these sort of self-propelled artillery systems, so short-range ballistic missiles and so forth. So I definitely think that North Korean dimension is in this war to stay.
Then about this, President Zelensky said that 4,000 North Korean soldiers deployed to Russia have lost their lives. Well, both Ukraine and the U.S. assess that the North Korean military has not had a significant impact on the battlefield. It seems that the front in the Kursk region has shifted in Russia's favor. Now, how should we interpret this contrasting evaluations of the North Korean troops' performance in battle, Dr. Yu?
Well, the contrasting evaluations reflect the complexity of analyzing battlefield dynamics and the specific role of North Korean troops on the battlefield. On one hand, the claim of approximately 4,000 North Korean soldiers killed suggests that they have been deployed in significant numbers and have likely participated in intense combat. However, Ukraine and U.S. assessments that their impact has been minimal could mean these forces are poorly trained, lack effective coordination, or have been deployed in less critical areas. The apparent shift in favor of Russia in the Kursk region might not necessarily be attributed to the North Korean troops. Instead, it could result from broader Russian strategies, reinforcement, or logistical improvements. The North Korean forces may serve more as a supplement to fill gaps in manpower rather than as a decisive factor on the battlefield. It is also important to consider propaganda and morale. Ukraine may downplay the impact of North Korean troops to avoid overestimating their capabilities, while Russia might highlight their involvement to demonstrate growing international support. While the deaths of North Korean soldiers indicate their active involvement, their limited battlefield impact aligns with the view that they are not well prepared or central to Russia's strategies. The Kursk front's development likely stem from other factors, with North Korean troops playing only a peripheral role.
Right, so they are largely involved, but their performance we'll have to see. Now, as the new year began, both Ukraine and Russia's leaders, of course, have issued their New Year's addresses, and President Zelensky pledged to use all means possible to end Russia's invasion. And with Trump's upcoming inauguration soon, do you foresee an intensification of territorial battles and preparations for a potential peace negotiation?
Yes, it's very likely that territorial battles will intensify as both sides seek to strengthen their positions before any potential negotiations. President Zelensky's commitment to ending the invasions highlights Ukraine's determination to regain occupied territories and secure a favorable position in any future talks. Similarly, Russia is expected to push for territorial gains or solidify control over key areas to bolster its bargaining power. Trump's inauguration adds another layer of the uncertainty. If the U.S. adopts a different approach under his leadership, such as encouraging swift negotiations or reassessing military aid, Both Ukraine and Russia might feel a sense of urgency to achieve a significant result on the battlefield before any shift in international policy occur. The coming months could see heightened offensives, particularly in contested regions, as both sides aim to reshape the front lines. However, this intensification of battles also comes with the risks, including escalating casualties and further destructions, which could complicate or delay peace efforts. Ultimately, how much the conflict escalates will depend on how quickly diplomatic channels open and the direction of the U.S. involvement under the new administrations.
Now, in opposition to Zelensky, in his New Year's address, Russian President Vladimir Putin did not mention the Ukraine war, marking the first time since the invasion has began. Dr. Davis, what do you think is the reason for this omission?
Look, I think that Putin is conscious of the fact that for many people in Russia, whilst they want to see a Russian victory, they want to see a rapid end to the war. The war is starting to impact on the Russian economy. And so Putin doesn't necessarily want to play this up. I think he wants to basically keep this going in the background. He feels that he can outlast the West and he can outlast the Ukrainians, with the Ukrainians suffering from severe manpower shortages and training challenges. And of course, we've now Trump about to be inaugurated. There's a great deal of uncertainty as to what the Trump administration's policy will be towards Ukraine. I think Putin is probably hoping that Trump will pull the rug out from under the Ukrainians. I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore. I think that the Trump people are starting to reconsider that and starting to think that maybe this is going to take longer than they had assumed. So I think that from Putin's perspective, he wants to keep this going. He may be required to issue a new mobilization in order to gain some sort of significant advantage on the battlefield. He doesn't want to play that up to the Russian people because he knows that will be unpopular.
Right, so he's thinking about the domestic opinion. Now, meanwhile, President-elect Donald Trump has expressed support for Russia's stance against Ukraine's NATO membership. He's also known to be arranging a sit-down with Putin soon. Do you think the situation could lead to peace negotiations that would favor Russia, Dr. Yu?
Well, I think that Trump's statement could have a significant impact on the dynamics of peace negotiations, potentially tilting the scales in Russia's favor. By aligning with Russia's opposition to Ukraine's NATO memberships, Trump is effectively weakening one of Ukraine's key bargaining positions. NATO membership has been central to Ukraine's demand for ensuring its long-term security, and any perceived loss of the U.S. support for these aspirations could embolden Russia's position at the negotiation table. However, whether this leads to peace negotiations that favor Russia is less certain. Ukraine has shown remarkable resilience and is unlikely to easily compromise on issues it sees as critical to its sovereignty and security. Moreover, other NATO allies may continue to support Ukraine's membership bid, maintaining a counterbalance to Trump's stance. What we might see is a shift in the tone of the negotiations, with Russia potentially leveraging Trump's position to push for ceasefire that formalizes its territorial gains without addressing Ukraine's security concerns fully. This could put Ukraine in a difficult spot, as it may have to recalibrate its demands to align with the changing international support. In the end, Trump's statement may complicate and prolong negotiations. While it might open the door for dialogue, it risks sidelining Ukraine's priorities, leaving the country vulnerable unless other allies step in to reinforce their commitment to Ukraine's goals.
What about you, Dr. Davis? Trump has recently said that he hopes peace negotiations would take place within 6 months of the inauguration. While the details of any potential peace agreement under the Trump administration remain unclear, what do you expect such an agreement to entail?
Well, it's a complex picture because you've got to look at the dynamics happening within the GOP, the Republican Party, and particularly in the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. There's elements within MAGA that are totally opposed to supporting Ukraine and basically want to pull the rug out from under it. So Vice President J.D. Vance is a key proponent of that. And I think that there's also recognition that if Trump were to do, in fact, that and pull the rug out from under the Ukrainians, he would be certainly endangering NATO security, because what that would lead to would be effectively a peace in our time situation where Putin gets a ceasefire which allows him to rebuild and regroup, and then either launch the war against Ukraine a third time, a year or so down the track, or potentially go after NATO territory. So I think that Trump will be very conscious about not repeating Biden's experience of being seen weak in his withdrawal from Afghanistan. Trump does not want an Afghanistan-type withdrawal in regards to Ukraine. So I think the dynamics are actually changing. I think you could see the Trump administration maybe hanging on there, maybe supporting the Ukrainians a bit longer, trying to put pressure on the Russians to come to some sort of deal that makes Trump look strong, because Trump as a leader cannot afford to look weak. And if he pulls the rug out from under the Ukrainians, he will look weak, because he will be not only undermining the Ukrainians, he'll be undermining NATO's security as well.
Right, so we'll have to see closely on how Trump's policies on this would go through. Now, with the war, like I've said, it has been entering its fourth year. Dr. Davis, do you think the conflict will enter a new phase? And what factors or events might be turning points in the conflict?
Well, if we take the scenario that peace negotiations that are coming up fail, then I think you will see the war escalate. I think that there's already pressure from the Siloviki and the oligarchs within Russia on Putin to escalate the war, to intensify it so that Russia can win it militarily. Putin certainly thinks that he can win it militarily, but he may require a mobilization of Russian society and mobilization of forces to do that. So I do think you could see in the next 12 to 18 months some sort of intensification of the war. On the other hand, the Ukrainians are facing a difficult situation, particularly if US support dwindles. The Europeans will need to step in to try and fill that gap. They probably can't fill it completely. And the Ukrainian indigenous military industrial capacity is not yet at a level whereby they could fill the gap either. So the Ukrainians could then be in a difficult situation. And as I said, what that ends up with is some sort of Russian victory that then emboldens Russia to maybe try their luck in places such as the Baltic Sea or the Baltic states. And then we're talking a direct clash between NATO and Russia a year or two down the track. On the other hand, if Trump were to actually step in and directly support Ukraine effectively, and the Ukrainians start to push the Russians back, then the risk of Putin reaching for tactical nuclear weapons once again comes onto the table. And what Trump has to do then, and what NATO has to do, is reinforce deterrence against Russia to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Right. What about Dr. Yu? Do you have anything to add on to this?
Well, I think that the war is likely to definitely enter a new phase this year as strategies and external factors continue to evolve. Western military aid will be critical for Ukraine to maintain its counter-offensives. However, any reduction in support could weaken its position on the battlefield, making progress more challenging. At the same time, Russia faces mounting internal challenges, including economic sanctions and growing domestic dissent. These pressures could force Moscow to adjust its approach, potentially leading to either further escalation or a shift toward negotiations, depending on how events unfold. Battlefield development will be a key factor in shaping the world's direction. Significant Ukrainian gains could shift the momentum in their favor, while Russian reinforcement and evolving strategies might prolong the conflict and intensify the stalemate. Meanwhile, the diplomatic efforts may also play a role in determining the world's trajectories. But given the high stakes and entrenched position on both sides, reaching a meaningful compromise remains uncertain. Ultimately, 2025 will likely be shaped by the interplay of military aid, internal pressures, and diplomatic efforts, all of which will determine whether the conflict escalates further or begins to move towards resolutions.
Right. Let's hope the two sides could reach a resolution as soon as possible for, of course, the sake of the people over there. We'll have to leave our discussion right here. Many thanks for your insights, Dr. Yu and Mr. Davis. Dr. Davis, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.